The messenger left 4 days ago. He ran the whole way, down from Bethany, past the fig orchards, across the Jordan Valley, through the crowds that always gathered wherever this rabbi traveled. He found Jesus. He delivered the message word for word, exactly as the sisters had told him to say it. Lord, the one you love is sick. And Jesus did not move. He stayed where he was for 2 more days. He taught, he prayed, he ate, he slept. And 30 miles away, in a village on the eastern slope of the Mount of Olives, a man named Lazarus stopped breathing. By the time Jesus finally said, "Let's go to Judea," it was too late. Everyone knew it. The disciples knew it. The mourners filling the house knew it. And when Martha heard Jesus was coming up the road, finally after 4 days, she walked out to meet him, and she said something that has echoed through 2,000 years of human grief. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. If you had been here. 5 words, and inside those 5 words lives every prayer that felt unanswered, every diagnosis that came back wrong, every phone call in the middle of the night, every child who didn't come home, every marriage that ended anyway, every dream that died while you were still believing. If you had been here, here's what I want you to understand before we go any further. This is not a video about miracles. The miracle at the end of this story is almost beside the point. What I want you to see, what I think changes everything if you really see it, is the timing. Not that Jesus raised Lazarus, but that he waited until day 4 to do it, because he did that on purpose. And somewhere on a cold lakeshore at dawn, a man is building a charcoal fire. He is crouching in the dark, arranging the coals, laying fish across the grate. He is waiting. He has been waiting all night. We will get to that fire, but not yet. First, we need to go back, way back, to a teenager at the bottom of a hole in the ground. The boy's name was Joseph. He was 17 years old, and his brothers hated him. Not the mild, grumbling kind of hatred that fades after an argument, but the deep, settled kind that had been calcifying for years. He was their father's favorite. He wore a coat that said so. He had dreams, and he told people about them, which is perhaps the worst thing a favored youngest son can do at a family dinner table. So one afternoon, out in the fields near Dothan, the brothers made a decision. They stripped him of the coat. They threw him into a dry cistern, a pit dug into the limestone, maybe 12 feet deep, maybe 15. And then they sat down to eat lunch. You have to stop on that detail. They sat down to eat lunch while Joseph was at the bottom of the hole, calling up to them. And we know he was, because years later, his brothers will admit they could hear his anguish and ignored it. They opened their food and ate. Then a caravan came through, Ishmaelite traders heading to Egypt, and the brothers made a second decision. They pulled Joseph out of the pit, not out of mercy, but out of profit, and they sold him for 20 pieces of silver. Joseph arrived in Egypt as property. He was purchased by a man named Potiphar, an officer in Pharaoh's court, a man of rank, a man of power, a man whose house Joseph would run within months because the gift God had placed in this boy could not be suppressed even by slavery. Joseph rose. He always rose. And then Potiphar's wife lied about him, and he fell again, this time into prison. Here is what most people miss about the prison years. Joseph did not just survive in prison. The text says God was with him, that the prison warden trusted him with everything, that Joseph effectively ran the prison the same way he had run Potiphar's house. The gift kept working. The favor kept following, and still, he stayed in prison. 2 years after Joseph correctly interpreted the dreams of Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker, 2 years after he said to the cupbearer, "Remember me when you are restored, mention me to Pharaoh." The cupbearer forgot him, just forgot him. 2 years of silence. 2 years of the cupbearer going back to his goblets and his vineyards and his comfortable life while Joseph sat in a cell and waited. 13 years in total. From the pit to the palace, 13 years. And if you had asked Joseph on day 1 of year 13 whether God was late, I think you know what his honest answer would have been. The Jewish historian Josephus, writing in his Antiquities of the Jews, describes the Egyptian court of this period as one of the most impenetrable political structures in the ancient world. A hierarchy of officials so rigid, so layered, so dependent on the pharaoh's personal trust that no outsider could have climbed it through normal means. There was no application process. There was no networking your way in. The only door into Pharaoh's presence was Pharaoh's own dream. And God gave Pharaoh a dream, not in year 1, not in year 5, in year 13, on the exact morning when the cupbearer finally remembered the Hebrew prisoner who had read dreams like open books, on the exact morning when Pharaoh woke up disturbed and desperate and willing to listen to anyone. God gave Pharaoh 2 dreams in one night that no one in Egypt could explain. And Joseph walked out of the prison cell and straight into the throne room. By sundown, he was second in command of the most powerful empire on earth. By sundown, he had a signet ring on his finger, a gold chain around his neck, and a new Egyptian name. By sundown, the 13 years were over. Here is what I want you to sit with. If the cupbearer had remembered Joseph in year 1, if he had mentioned him to Pharaoh immediately, if Joseph had been released from prison in the first month, Joseph would have been a footnote, a freed slave, a foreign interpreter with an interesting story. He would have had no platform, no position, no authority to save anyone. The delay was not the obstacle to the plan. The delay was the plan. Now multiply 13 years by 30. That is how long Israel waited in Egypt. 400 years. 400 years of brick and mortar, of quotas and whips, of babies thrown into the Nile. 400 years of a people who had been promised a land, a nation, a future, living as property in someone else's country. 400 years between the last word God spoke to the patriarchs and the moment a burning bush stopped a shepherd in his tracks on the backside of a desert. 400 years of silence. And you need to understand what that kind of silence does to a people. It does not just make them tired. It rewrites their theology. By the time Moses showed up, there were Israelites in Egypt who had stopped believing the promises were real. How could you blame them? Their great-great-great-grandparents had heard the stories. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the covenant, the land flowing with milk and honey. But that was ancient history now. The kind of story you tell children at night, not the kind you stake your life on in the morning when the sun comes up and the quota hasn't changed and the foreman is already raising his hand. The silence had lasted so long it had started to sound like an answer. But here is what was happening in the silence. A population was growing. When Jacob's family first came to Egypt, there were 70 of them, 70 people, one extended family, small enough to fit in a few tents. 400 years later, when Moses led them out, the text tells us there were 600,000 men of fighting age. That means a total population, counting women, children, the elderly, of somewhere between 2 and 3 million people. God was not ignoring Israel. He was multiplying Israel. The delay was not a pause in the plan. The delay was the incubation of the plan. You cannot liberate a family, you can liberate a nation. And it takes 400 years to turn 70 people into a nation. Stay with me because this next part matters. When God finally did show up, when the bush burned and Moses took off his sandals and the voice spoke from the fire, God said something that is so easy to read past that most people never stop on it. He said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people. I have heard their cry. I know their sufferings, and I have come down to deliver them. I have seen, I have heard, I know. Present perfect tense. Not, I just noticed. Not, I finally checked in. I have been watching this whole time. I have heard every cry that went up from every slave in every brickyard in every year of those 400 years. Not one of them was lost. Not one of them dissolved into the air unheard. Every single one landed. The Hebrew word used for Israel's waiting in this period is shaka, haka. It is the word for waiting, yes, but it is not the passive waiting of someone who has given up. Scholars of biblical Hebrew will tell you that shaka carries the image of a hunter, crouching in absolute stillness, every muscle coiled, eyes locked on the horizon, not passive, not resigned, predatory patience, the kind of waiting that is itself a form of readiness. Israel did not know they were in a shaka posture, but God did. And when the moment finally came, when the 10th plague broke Pharaoh's grip and the doors of Egypt swung open, Israel walked out with the wealth of their oppressors in their hands. The text says they plundered Egypt. 400 years of unpaid labor, repaid in silver and gold and clothing on the night of the Passover. The delay did not just end, it paid interest. Now I want to take you somewhere smaller, somewhere quieter, away from the crowds and the plagues and the parting seas, into a house in the hill country of Ephraim, where a woman named Hannah is sitting at the table and cannot eat. Her name means grace, and her life, from the outside, looks like anything but. She has a husband who loves her, genuinely, tenderly, more than is customary for the time. His name is Elkanah, and every year he gives her a double portion at the family feast, which is his way of saying, I see you. You are enough. But Hannah knows what Elkanah cannot fix. Her womb is closed, and in a world where a woman's worth was calculated almost entirely by the children she produced, Hannah carries a weight that the double portion cannot lift. She also has a rival, Elkanah's other wife. This was a polygamous household, a painful and common arrangement in the ancient world, is a woman named Peninnah. And Peninnah has children, many children, and she uses them the way cruel people have always used their advantages, as weapons. The text says she provoked Hannah year after year until Hannah wept and could not eat. Year after year. This was not a season of difficulty. This was the shape of Hannah's life. This was every feast, every new year. Every morning she woke up and the answer was still no. And here is what wrecks me about Hannah. She kept going to the tabernacle, year after year of no, and she still showed up. She still made the journey to Shiloh. She still walked through the doors of the house of God. And one particular year, the grief rose so high in her that she could not contain it anymore. She stood before the Lord and she prayed. And the text says she prayed in her heart, her lips moving but no sound coming out, tears running down her face, body shaking with the force of what she was trying to say to God. She was praying so hard The priest thought she was drunk. Eli watched her from his seat by the doorpost. This old priest, this man who had seen everything in his years at the tabernacle, and he misread her completely. He walked over and said, "How long will you keep on getting drunk? Put away your wine." And Hannah, in one of the most quietly extraordinary moments in all of Scripture, did not collapse, did not leave, did not let an old man's bad theology be the last word in the room. She looked at Eli and she said, "I am a woman troubled in spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but I have been pouring out my soul before the Lord." Pouring out my soul. That phrase, in the original Hebrew, shapak nefesh, means to empty yourself completely, like tipping a vessel until there is nothing left inside. Hannah had been carrying this grief so long, holding it so carefully, managing it so she could keep functioning. And on this particular evening, in this particular house, she finally let it all go. And God heard her, not immediately. The text does not say a voice came from heaven. No angel appeared. Eli gave her a blessing. "Go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant your petition." And Hannah went home. She ate. She was no longer sad. And in the morning, Elkanah and Hannah rose early and worshipped, and they went home. And in due time, Hannah conceived. The child she bore was named Samuel. And Samuel would grow up to be the last and greatest of Israel's judges, the prophet who anointed the first two kings of Israel, Saul and David, and whose influence shaped the entire monarchic period of Israel's history. The child born from a barren womb and a shattered prayer became the hinge point of a nation's story. God was not late for Hannah. God was building Samuel. She has no name in the text. That is the first thing you notice when you read Luke chapter 13. Every other person in the story gets a name. The synagogue ruler is there. The crowd is there. Jesus is there. But the woman at the center of the miracle is identified only by her condition. A woman who had a disabling spirit for 18 years. She was bent over and could not fully straighten herself. 18 years. Think about what 18 years of that posture does to a person. Not just physically, though the physical reality is devastating enough. The compressed vertebrae, the muscle atrophy, the chronic pain that becomes so familiar, it stops feeling like pain and starts feeling like just the way things are. Think about what 18 years of looking at the ground does to you psychologically. You stop seeing horizons. You stop looking at faces. Your entire visual world becomes feet and dust in the hem of other people's garments. For 18 years, this woman could not look up. And yet, and this is the detail I need you to hold, she was in the synagogue. Not at home, not hiding, not lying on a mat somewhere waiting for the suffering to end. She was in the synagogue, on the Sabbath, in the house of God, present and upright in every way she could be upright, even if her spine would not cooperate. She was there. After 18 years of unanswered suffering, she still showed up. There is something in that which I think we are not supposed to move past too quickly. It would have been completely understandable for this woman to have stopped coming. It would have been theologically defensible, emotionally reasonable, and humanly forgivable for her to have looked at the synagogue door after year 5 or year 10 or year 15 and said, "I have asked, I have prayed, I have shown up, and nothing has changed," and stayed home. She did not stay home. She walked through the door, bent double, the same way she had walked through it for 18 years, and she took her place in the congregation. And Jesus saw her. The text does not say she approached him. It does not say she asked for anything. It says he saw her and he called her over and he said, "Woman, you are freed from your disability." And he laid his hands on her. And immediately she straightened up. Immediately. 18 years, and then immediately. The synagogue ruler was furious, of course, because it was the Sabbath, and healing on the Sabbath violated the law as he understood it. And Jesus turned to him with a sharpness that is rare in the gospel accounts and said, "You hypocrite. Does not each of you on the Sabbath untie his ox or his donkey from the manger and lead it away to water it? And ought not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan bound for 18 years, be loosed from this bond on the Sabbath day?" A daughter of Abraham. That is the title Jesus gave her. Not this sick woman, not this unfortunate case. A daughter of Abraham, an heir of the covenant, a full member of the promise, someone to whom God owed the fulfillment of his word. Jesus looked at 18 years of suffering and did not call it abandonment. He called it a bond that was about to be broken. The weight had a name, and the name was not forgotten. Now, I want to introduce you to a woman whose waiting makes 18 years look brief. Her name is Anna. She appears in the Gospel of Luke for exactly 4 verses. 4 verses, and she has been waiting her entire adult life for what happens in those 4 verses. Here is what we know about her. She was a prophetess, the daughter of Phanuel of the tribe of Asher. She had been married for 7 years before her husband died, and she had been a widow ever since. And then the text gives us a number that stops you cold. She was 84 years old. Now there is a textual debate among scholars about whether 84 years refers to her age or to the length of her widowhood. And if it is the latter, if she was widowed after 7 years of marriage and then spent 84 years as a widow, she would be well over 100 years old. Either way, the point is the same. This woman had been waiting for a very long time. And the text says she did not leave the temple. She worshiped night and day, fasting and praying. The church historian Eusebius, writing in his ecclesiastical history in the 3rd century, describes the role of widows in Second Temple Judaism as one of the most significant and underappreciated institutions of the period. These women, often elderly, freed from domestic obligations, possessing decades of accumulated prayer and prophetic sensitivity, served as what Eusebius called the intercessory backbone of the temple community. They were there when the priests went home. They were there in the hours before dawn when the lamps burned low. They held the vigil that everyone else was too busy or too young or too comfortable to hold. Anna was one of these women. And on the morning that a young couple from Galilee walked into the temple courts carrying an infant for the purification rites, Anna was there. She had been there all night. She had been there in some form for most of her life. And when she saw the child, when something in her spirit recognized what her eyes were seeing, she gave thanks to God and began to speak about the child to everyone who was waiting for the redemption of Jerusalem. She had waited decades to say those words, and she was there, exactly then. Not a day early, not a day late. Here is where I want to pull back for a moment and ask the question this whole script has been circling. Why? Why the pit before the palace? Why 400 years before the burning bush? Why years of barrenness before Samuel? Why 18 years before the Sabbath healing? Why 84 years or 100 before 4 verses in the Gospel of Luke? What is God doing in the waiting? The prophet Isaiah gives us a word. In chapter 40, verse 31, one of the most quoted verses in the Bible, worn smooth by repetition until we sometimes stop hearing it, he writes, "But they who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint." The word translated wait here is the Hebrew kava, kava. And kava does not mean what we usually mean when we say waiting. It does not mean sitting in a doctor's office watching the clock. The root of kava is a verb that means to twist, to braid, to wind strands together under tension. Picture a rope being made. You take individual fibers, thin, weak, easily broken on their own, and you twist them together under tension, winding them tighter and tighter until something new emerges, something that did not exist before the twisting, something that could not be broken the same way the individual fibers could be broken. The tension is not destroying the rope. The tension is creating it. That is kava. That is the waiting God calls his people to, not passive endurance, not gritted teeth survival. A transformation that is only possible under tension. A strength that can only be wound into you through the very pressure you are desperate to escape. Augustine of Hippo, writing in his Confessions in the 4th century, put it this way, and I am paraphrasing here because the original Latin deserves better than a quick quotation. Our hearts, he said, are restless, fundamentally, structurally restless, and they will remain restless until they find their rest in God. The waiting, the aching, the longing, the unanswered prayer is not a malfunction of the spiritual life. It is the spiritual life. It is the condition that keeps us reaching toward the only thing that can actually satisfy the reach. The wait does something to you that the answer cannot do. The answer gives you what you asked for. The wait gives you the capacity to hold it. Hannah needed years of barrenness before she could release Samuel back to God, which is exactly what she did. The moment he was weaned, she brought him to the tabernacle and gave him back. A woman who had received Samuel easily, without the long, aching years, might not have been able to do that. The weight had formed in her a grip that was simultaneously fierce and open. She held him fully, and she let him go completely. That is not natural. That is not human. That is what happens to a person who has spent years in kava. Pay attention to this, because this is the part that changes how you pray. You have been asking God to end the weight, and God has been using the weight to make you into someone who can receive what comes after it. These are not competing agendas. They are the same agenda, running on two different timelines, yours and his. And his timeline is not slower than yours. It is larger than yours.
Before we get to the shore, I want to give you something you can hold on to. Not just a feeling, not just a story, something structural, something you can pull out on the specific night when the feeling is gone and the stories feel distant, and all you have left is the question itself, raw and unanswered in the dark. 4 reasons God shows up when he does. 4 reasons the timing is not random, not careless, not a cosmic scheduling error. 4 reasons that, taken together, build a case so solid, I believe it can hold the weight of almost any weight you are currently living through. The first reason, the delay protects the miracle's destination. When Jesus received word that Lazarus was sick, he was in a specific place, surrounded by specific people, in a specific moment of his ministry. The religious authorities in Jerusalem had already tried to stone him. His disciples were nervous about returning to Judea at all. When Jesus finally said, "Let's go," Thomas said grimly, Let us also go, that we may die with him." The atmosphere was hostile. The audience was skeptical. The stage was charged. And into that atmosphere, into that exact room of grief and doubt and hostile witnesses, Jesus walked up to a sealed tomb and called a dead man out of it. The miracle landed where it needed to land, in front of the people who needed most to see it, at the moment when the cost of believing was highest, and the weight of the evidence was therefore most decisive. John tells us that many of the Jews who had come to mourn with Mary believed in Jesus that day. Many. Not a few. Many. If Jesus had arrived on day one and healed a sick man, it would have been a healing. Remarkable, yes, but healings happened. People recovered from illnesses. There was always an alternative explanation available for those who wanted one. But nobody recovers from 4 days dead. In Jewish tradition, it was believed that the soul lingered near the body for 3 days after death, 3 days of possible return. By day 4, even that hope was gone. The stone was sealed. The decomposition had begun. Martha said plainly, "Lord, by this time there is an odor." Jesus waited for day 4 because day 4 removed every alternative explanation. The delay was not cruelty. The delay was precision. He was protecting the miracle's destination, making sure it landed with maximum force, in maximum clarity, in front of the people who needed maximum evidence. God does not waste delays. He aims them. The second reason, the delay builds the vessel. Here is what I mean. Joseph at 17 was gifted, favored, and almost certainly insufferable about it. He had dreams from God, genuine, real, prophetically accurate dreams, and he told his brothers about them in a way that suggests he had not yet learned the difference between a word from God and a conversation starter. The coat, the dreams, the way he watched his brothers and brought bad reports about them to his father. Joseph at 17 was a diamond, genuinely precious, genuinely valuable, in a completely uncut form. 13 years of slavery and prison cut the diamond. The man who stood before Pharaoh at 30 was not the boy who fell into the pit at 17. He was someone who had learned to lead without title, to serve without recognition, to hope without evidence, to interpret without ego. When Pharaoh offered him the second highest position in the empire, Joseph did not say, "Finally." He said, "Without God, I can do nothing," and meant it. The delay had built a Joseph who could hold what God was about to give him. The palace would have destroyed the 17-year-old. It could only be handed to the 30-year-old, and it took 13 years to get from one to the other. The wait does not delay your destiny. It constructs the person your destiny requires. The third reason, the delay positions the witness. Anna did not just receive the moment when Mary and Joseph walked into the temple. She was positioned for it. Positioned by decades of faithful presence, by night and day prayer, by a life so oriented toward that one central hope that when the hope finally materialized in the form of a 6-week-old infant, she recognized it instantly. If Anna had received her answer in year 1 of her widowhood, she would not have been standing in that particular corridor of the temple at that particular hour. She would have been elsewhere, living a different life, occupying a different place. The decades of waiting were simultaneously decades of positioning. Every morning she showed up was a morning she was exactly where she needed to be for the moment that was coming. And here is the part nobody tells you. Your waiting is not just forming you. It is positioning you. Right now, in the middle of whatever season you are in, the unanswered prayer, the closed door, the diagnosis, the silence, you are being moved into a location, an alignment, a specific place in the story that you cannot see yet, but that will make complete sense the moment the answer arrives. You're not stuck. You are being positioned. The fourth reason, the delay defeats the alternative explanation. This is the reason that lives underneath all the others, because here is what every delay has in common, from Joseph's prison to Hannah's barrenness to Anna's decades to Lazarus's tomb. When the answer finally came, it could not be explained away. No one looked at Israel walking out of Egypt and said, well, they were probably going to be released anyway. No one looked at Hannah nursing Samuel and said, these things sort themselves out eventually. No one stood at the mouth of Lazarus's tomb 4 days after the burial and said, he must have been in a coma. The longer the wait, the more undeniable the answer. God is not just answering your prayer. He is building a testimony that cannot be argued with. He is constructing a story that will still be told. In this case, literally thousands of years later, because the timing made it impossible to explain by any other means. The delay is the signature. The delay is how you know it was him. Now, I want to give you 2 words from the Greek New Testament because they reframe something you may have misread your entire life. The first word is takeos. It is the Greek word for quickly or soon. It is the word behind the promise in Revelation. Behold, I am coming quickly. And if you have ever read that promise and felt a complicated mix of hope and skepticism, because John wrote it 2,000 years ago, and here we still are, I want you to know that takeos does not mean what our English word soon means. Takeos shares its root with the ancient Greek word for a chariot wheel in full motion. The image is not of a short distance to travel, but of unstoppable momentum once movement begins. I am coming quickly does not mean I will be there in a moment. It means when I move, nothing will slow me down. The speed is not about the calendar. It is about the nature of the arrival. When God finally moves, when the moment he has been building toward finally comes, it will be like a chariot at full gallop, unstoppable, irreversible, complete. The second word is ekbalo. It means to cast out, to drive, to thrust. And it is the word Mark uses, the strongest of the gospel writers on this point, when he describes what happened to Jesus immediately after his baptism. The Spirit drove him into the wilderness, not led, not guided, drove. The same word used elsewhere for casting out demons. The Spirit of God took the Son of God, fresh from the voice at the Jordan saying, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased," and thrust him into 40 days of desert and hunger and temptation. If the delay can happen to Jesus, if the Spirit of God can drive the Son of God into a wilderness immediately after the most affirming moment of his earthly life, then the wilderness you are in is not evidence that God has withdrawn his approval. It may be evidence that he is driving you somewhere, that the delay is not a detour from the path. The delay is the path. I know what some of you are thinking right now. This is all true. I believe it is true. But knowing it is true and feeling it in the waiting are two completely different things. And the night is long, and the answer has not come. And the theological framework, however solid, does not stop the ache. I hear that. I want to say something honest before we get to the final story. The waiting is hard. It is supposed to be hard. It is not hard because something has gone wrong. It is hard because something real is happening. The kava twisting is not painless. The rope does not form without tension. And there is no shortcut through it, no theological insight that makes it stop hurting, no understanding of God's timing that fully anesthetizes the experience of living inside it. What there is, what I believe with everything in me, and what every story we have looked at tonight bears witness to, is this: He has not forgotten you. He has not looked away. He has not moved on to someone easier to help or more deserving of the answer. The silence is not absence. It never has been. Not for Joseph in the prison, not for Israel in Egypt, not for Hannah in the tabernacle, not for the woman bent double in the synagogue, not for Anna in the temple courts at dawn, and not for you. This is not a story about a number. This is not a story about a timeline. This is not a story about how long you have been waiting. This is a story about a God who has never once been late, and we are almost to the shore.
3 years, who had watched him feed thousands in calm storms and raise the dead, who had stood at the foot of the cross and watched him die, who had seen him alive again in a locked room on the evening of the resurrection. 7 men who, after all of that, went fishing. It is one of the strangest details in the entire New Testament, and I think we have domesticated it so thoroughly that we no longer feel how strange it is. The resurrection has happened. The tomb is empty. The risen Christ has appeared to Mary, to the disciples, to 500 people at once, according to Paul. And Peter, the one who walked on water, the one who said, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God," the one Jesus said he would build his church upon. Peter looked at the other 6 and said, "I am going fishing." And they all went with him. Why? I think it is because Peter did not know what to do with himself. The story he had been living inside for 3 years, the story that gave his days shape and direction and meaning, had ended at a cross. And yes, it had begun again at an empty tomb. But what came next? What does a fisherman turned apostle do on a Tuesday morning after the resurrection? Nobody had given them a manual. Nobody had told them where to stand or what to say or how to move forward. So Peter did the only thing he knew how to do before Jesus came along. He went back to the boat. All night they fished, and all night the nets came up empty. John 21 does not editorialize about this. It just states it plainly, the way you state a fact that hurts too much to dress up. They caught nothing. And then, as the night was ending, as the first gray line of dawn was beginning to separate the sky from the water on the eastern horizon, they saw a figure standing on the shore. They did not know it was Jesus. The text is careful about this. They saw someone, a man, standing on the shore in the early morning half light, maybe 100 yards away. And the man called out across the water. And I want you to hear how he said it, because the word matters. He called out, "Children, do you have any fish?" Children, not disciples, not servants, not even friends, which is what he had called them in the upper room. Children. The Greek word is paideia, a term of tender address, the kind of word you use with someone young and beloved and in over their head. 7 grown men in a fishing boat, exhausted and empty-handed after a night of failure, and the voice from the shore calls them children. They answered him, "No." And he said, "Cast the net on the right side of the boat and you will find some." So they cast it, and immediately the net was so full they could not haul it in. 153 large fish, John tells us, and he gives us the exact number because he was there, and he counted them because that is the kind of detail you remember from the most important morning of your life. And John looked at the net bulging with fish, and he looked at the figure on the shore, and something clicked. He turned to Peter and said, "It is the Lord." And Peter, impulsive, uncontainable, gloriously excessive Peter, threw on his outer garment, and jumped into the water. They were 100 yards from shore. He did not wait for the boat. He swam. And now, I need to tell you about the fire. When Peter hauled himself out of the water, dripping and breathing hard, he looked up at the shore, and he saw Jesus crouching over a charcoal fire. Fish were already laid across it. Bread was already set beside it. The meal was already being made. Jesus had not arrived at the shore when the disciples saw him. He had been there before they saw him. The fire was already burning. The food was already cooking. He had been on that shore, building that fire, preparing that breakfast, while they were out in the dark catching nothing. He was not waiting for them to succeed before he showed up. He was already there in their failure, building something warm for them to come home to. And here, right here, on this cold lake shore in the early morning, with the smell of wood smoke and grilled fish in the air, here is where everything we have talked about tonight comes together. Remember the fire I mentioned at the very beginning? A man crouching on a cold lake shore, arranging coals, waiting. I told you we would get to it. We are here. The charcoal fire on the shore is the answer to every dark night in this script. It is the answer to the pit where Joseph lay cold and betrayed while his brothers ate lunch. It is the answer to 400 years of Egyptian silence while God was multiplying a nation in the dark. It is the answer to Hannah's shaking lips in the tabernacle, her soul poured out and the room still quiet. It is the answer to 18 years of staring at dust and hemlines and the ground that never changed. It is the answer to 84 years of night and day prayer in the temple courts by a woman most people walk past without seeing. In every single one of those stories, in every dark night, in every empty net, in every sealed tomb, Jesus was already on the shore, already there, already building the fire, already preparing what came next, not waiting to see how things turned out before he decided to show up. Already there, in the dark, before the dawn, making breakfast. This is the God of the Bible, not the God who arrives when you finally deserve it or finally believe hard enough or finally stop doubting. The God who is already at the destination, working backward into your night, building something warm for you to come home to. Peter climbed out of the water and Jesus said, "Come and have breakfast." Not, "Where have you been?" Not, "Why did you go back to fishing?" Not, "Do you understand now what I have been doing?" Just, "Come, eat, sit down. The food is ready. I have been waiting for you." That word, waiting, runs through this entire script like a thread. Joseph waiting in prison, Israel waiting in Egypt, Hannah waiting in the tabernacle, the bent woman waiting in her body, Anna waiting in the temple, the disciples waiting in the dark on a boat with empty nets. But here is what I want to leave you with. Here at the end of all these stories, God was waiting too, not helplessly, not passively, not because he had lost control of the timeline or forgotten to check his calendar. He was waiting the way a father waits at the end of a driveway when a child has been gone too long, present, alert, entirely oriented toward the moment of return. He was waiting with a fire already lit and a meal already made and a word of welcome already forming on his lips. He was waiting for the exact moment when the arrival would mean the most, when it would be undeniable, when it would be the thing that held the rest of the story together, when it would be worth the wait. And now, 3 things before we go. The first, your wait is not a waiting room. It is not a meaningless interlude between the life you have and the life you want. Something is happening in it, something that cannot happen any other way in any other season, at any other speed. The kava is working. The rope is being wound. The vessel is being built. The witness is being positioned. You may not be able to see any of it yet. You may not feel any of it yet. But Joseph could not see it from the bottom of the pit either. And he ended up running Egypt. The second, the silence is not absence. I know it feels like absence. I know it can feel on the worst nights like the line has gone dead and no one is on the other end. But the God who said, I have seen, I have heard, I know, to 400 years of silent suffering is the same God who is looking at your situation right now. He has not missed a day of it. He has not misunderstood a moment of it. He has been on the shore the whole time, building the fire, waiting for you to look up and see him. The third, and this is the one I want you to carry out of here tonight. He has never once been late. Not for Joseph, not for Israel, not for Hannah, not for the woman bent double for 18 years who walked into the synagogue anyway. Not for Anna, who gave her whole widowhood to a vigil that most people thought was finished before it started. Not for Lazarus in a sealed tomb on day 4. Not for 7 exhausted fishermen with empty nets on a black lake before dawn. And he is not late for you. The fire is already burning. The meal is already being prepared. And the voice that called across the water to 7 tired men in a boat, tender, unhurried, completely untroubled by their empty nets, that same voice is calling across whatever dark water you are sitting on tonight. Come, have breakfast. I have been waiting for you. And the wait, all of it, every silent year and every unanswered morning and every night the nets came up empty. The wait was always going to end here, at a fire, on a shore, with him already there.